So, some of you may know that I run this podcast called The Best Damn Camp, where I'm going through all of the Riordanverse books in timeline order and really doing a deep dive on individual chapters. And in doing that, I have come to recognise, more so than I did prior because I've been reading these books for so long, some problematic elements within the stories that kind of appear throughout all of the series themselves. So I'm going to talk about that today. So here are some of the problematic elements within the Riordanverse books. Now, before anyone tries to claim that I should be cancelled because I hate Rick or anything like that, do know that I run a podcast about these books, I run a YouTube channel about these books, I have tattoos dedicated to these books. These books have been a defining thing in my life. I love them, but it doesn't mean I can't be critical of them. Saying this again because I've been told many times that clearly I do not like this series because all I do is criticise it. You can like things and criticise. Both can exist at the same time. Just putting that out there. But the reason why I'm doing this video is because there are things that I'm noticing more and more that don't sit quite right with me as an adult. So I wanted to do a video on this to talk about some of the things within the Riordanverse series that feel a bit off to me. The only one I won't really be covering is the sort of lacking or not the best diversity within the series, or the poor representation. It is great that we had representation. That is something that has never been debated. But the people of colour in the series, Leo, Frank, Piper, Hazel and the others, there are issues with their representation. That is something that's not been, that basically can't be refuted, and there are multiple posts about this that I will try and link in the description box as well to check out. But as someone who is white, it is not my place to talk on, and I'm not the most informed. So those links will be down there to check out yourself. But the ones I am going to be talking about are the ones that I feel most informed on. And there are 4 different things I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so I said 4. It's actually going to be 3. I just can't count. Let's get on with the video. First one is related to the book that I'm currently going through on my podcast, which is the Kane Chronicles, the first 2 books. And this is in relation to the age gaps that appear in the Riordanverse. Now there are 3 in particular that have gained most discussions in relation to the age gap issue. But the ones that I particularly want to talk about are Anubis and Sadie, a 5,000-year-old god and a 12/13-year-old girl, and Calypso and Leo, again, thousands-of-year-old goddess, and a 16-year-old boy. Now, just saying those ages, particularly the Anubis and Sadie one, should in itself show the problem. The other one that is also discussed is the Frank and Hazel age difference, which is of about 2 and a bit years, I think, of Frank being 16 and Hazel being 13. The reason why I'm not going to talk about that one that much is because the reason why it ended up being an age gap is because Rick forgot how timelines work. Hazel's actually meant to be 14 based on her birth date and all the things that pass in her story. She should actually be 14 at the time, like literally just turned 14. But, you know, I'll bypass that, and also, you know, it's clear enough. And that is also one that's been talked to death. So the ones that I want to talk about particularly are Anubis and Sadie, and the additional fact of Walt Stone also being an addition to that, of him also being 16, 17 in a relationship or having a crush on a 13-year-old girl. Just saying the ages, you know there is the problem here. But the main one that I do have the issue with is the Anubis and Sadie one, of the fact that this is an immortal god who has been around for thousands of years, showing romantic interest in a child, particularly a preteen, is the first time they meet. She is 12 years old the first time they meet, where initial romantic flirty banter occurs when she is 12. And it doesn't stop there. On her 13th birthday, they share a kiss. One that, not particularly consensual as well. But the issue that I have with it is the fact that the books bend over backwards to justify that it's perfectly fine for an immortal god who's been around for thousands of years to be with a child. Because, and I quote, He doesn't actually know how old he is, and he looks 16. They continue to go on about referring to him as a 16-year-old quite a lot in the series, even though he is an immortal thousands upon years god. The one that gets me the most is the fact that they pull out the whole I don't actually know how old I am just after Sadie herself has said he's about 5,000 years old. So the issue that comes with is that it's an age gap of an immortal with a child. And I know people try and get around the whole thing of like, oh yeah, but they do it all the time. Like, look at Twilight. I'm like, oh, at least she's not a minor. She is like going up to 18. She's like 17 in the first book and then later 18. Still kind of weird, but at least she's not a minor. Sadie is actually a minor throughout the entire Kane Chronicles series. She's never above the age of 13. She's a minor under the law. And yet, she's in a relationship with a thousands upon year god / a 16, 17-year-old boy. I don't know, the whole thing just reads really weirdly, and it's the same with the Calypso and Leo one, even though that's never actually addressed. They don't actually talk about her being an immortal goddess, even though Calypso is an immortal goddess. It just ends up not being as weird, I guess, because she looks 16, 17, and Leo is 16, 17, but it's still weird. Anyway, let's move on to another one, because I've talked enough about this already now. The next one I want to talk about is one that I've done a few videos about, and that is the fact that in the series, consistently, abusive behaviours, predominantly from adults towards children, are routinely ignored and brushed under the rug. Gabe's abuse of Percy, mentioned within the text itself that he has been physical with Percy, and the fact that he is physically, emotionally and financially abusing Sally, very quickly is brushed under the rug after the next book. Like, it's never brought up again. Annabeth's abuse. She continuously goes back to her abuses and is gaslit by the text and other characters into believing that they're actually good people and maybe she got it wrong. Talia Grace's mother was an alcoholic who continuously put her children in danger because she was an alcoholic and didn't really care much for her children, that to the point that Talia, as a child, basically ended up raising Jason until her mother abandoned him for Hera / Juno. So we can assume that this was also probably an abusive household. Like, Talia even talks about the amounts of arguments they used to have. It's still an abusive household. Luke Castellan is another example. Abandoned and neglected by his godly parent and left with a mother who, in his eyes, would have come across as having mental health issues that led to her being absolutely terrifying for him as a child. Not necessarily an abusive household, but definitely still one that is filled with neglect and horror as a child. Again, swept, like, basically everything, even Leo being abused by his family and being forced to be on the run and be on his own as a kid, is in a sense brushed under the rug as well. These things are never addressed, even though they are brought up consistently. The abuse within it isn't addressed. Again, like Ares beating Clarice. You know, all is forgiven by the end of the series. It's a problem I have, and is one that continues to appear in the books, is that abusive actions happen and are then never addressed or confronted for the bad aspects that they are. The abusive behaviours are never really addressed as they are. And I know these are a kids' series, but I still believe that this is something that should be addressed, because these things can be addressed in children's media. All I can think of, for example, is Tracy Beaker, the TV show. They addressed a lot of these things without the humorous element that Tracy Beaker often had. It showed kids who have come from neglectful, abusive homes. And it doesn't, sugarcoat these things. At least not to the extent that kind of seemingly happens in Percy Jackson and even other series like Harry Potter, where abuse is just basically kind of brushed over. And it's just disappointing. I really wish these things were addressed better. And then in general, in relation to the female characters, that a lot of the main female characters are quite similar. They all seemingly reject femininity in some way or look down on it. And the characters that are feminine within the series are usually demonized in some way or villainous. Look at Selena. She's labeled a traitor until obviously Clarice comes in and is like, no, she's not. She died for us. But she's still talked about being a traitor later on in Heroes of Olympus. And then the other villains that we see in Heroes of Olympus, for example, and even a little bit in Trials of Apollo, who are feminine female characters, are villains. Even Aphrodite is looked at as an airhead and occasionally a villainous person as well. There's no sort of balance between people being feminine and also, you know, being able to kick ass. There's no balance between that. It's either reject it or be demonized because you enjoy femininity. There's no in between. And I think that was a failure of the writing, in my opinion. But again, not a huge thing, but it's something that I have noticed a lot. And just in general, I guess these things aren't all necessarily problematic, except obviously for the first two in relation to age gaps and abuse. But they are things that I think are valid critiques of this series that are failings in some areas, because some of these things could have been addressed in the series and they just weren't, which is where I think the failing comes in. I know they're not the most important things, but I think it's still important to recognise that, yeah, these books aren't perfect. We may love them dearly and they may be the things that defined us as people. But no fiction is beyond critique. No fiction is objectively perfect. I think that's the case with the Riordanverse series. There are things that are problematic within the books. Like, there is no doubt about that. And these are just a few things that I've picked up in particular. You may not agree. That's perfectly fine. Just be kind in the comments if you don't agree. So I'm intrigued to see your thoughts on the problematic or critical things that I've discussed in relation to these 4 topics. So let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts on this are, and if there are any critiques that you have that you see as issues with the books that I may have missed out on. I'm intrigued to hear these. Please be kind. I will be deleting comments that are harassing because I've had enough of that, and the people who do that, you suck and are a horrible person. So yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about this. So let me know in the comment section down below, and of course, as always, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, drop a thumbs up or thumbs down, whatever you want to do. Let your friends know about this channel if they like Percy Jackson, and yeah, again, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time.